Elena Morales walked through the glass corridors of Whitmore Global with steady steps, though inside she carried the insecurity of someone still searching for her place in an empire that felt larger than the city of Chicago itself. At 27, newly hired as a financial analyst, she bore the determination of someone who had overcome social and cultural barriers to reach that position. Her mornings began early, always surrounded by stacks of reports, graphs, and endless meetings. She dressed impeccably, every detail chosen to project professionalism. But her sharp, calculating eyes also revealed the caution of someone who knew that in this environment, any mistake could come at a high cost. Whitmore Global was not just a company, it was a symbol of power. Located in Chicago's financial heart, it occupied entire floors of a skyscraper whose glass reflected both the gray sky and the ambitions of those who passed through its doors. In the newspapers, it was portrayed as an unshakable colossus, led with a firm hand by a man whose image had become synonymous with success. Alexander Whitmore, at 35, was the face on business magazines, the name quoted in lectures and headlines that called him the king of mergers and the architect of corporate turnarounds. As Elena adjusted to the exhausting pace of her new routine, there was no escaping Alexander's omnipresence. His figure appeared not only in the hallways, shielded by the respectful distance of secretaries and advisors, but also on televisions tuned to financial channels, in the articles scattered across the employee lounge, and even in hushed conversations over coffee. For some, he was an inspiration. For others, a cold, inaccessible man, as distant as the top of the tower he ruled from. But for Elena, there was a detail that made everything more complicated. She did not know him only by reputation. She carried a memory locked in silence, a fragment of a night illuminated by the chandeliers of the Whitmore Gala, where for a fleeting moment the magnate and the rising analyst had met as equals. That evening, among champagne glasses and orchestral music, he was not just the impenetrable businessman. He was someone who asked her to dance and, for a few minutes, made all differences between them vanish. The warmth of that moment still lingered, though hidden beneath layers of rationality. At the office, Elena worked hard to keep her feet on the ground. Every spreadsheet revised, every analysis delivered on time was her way of building credibility in an environment where being young, female, and Latina still drew assessing glances. At the same time, she carried within her a life quietly growing, a secret she needed to protect until she had the strength to face the truth. Chicago's cold mornings constantly reminded her of the pressure surrounding her, and every headline about Alexander only reinforced the vast distance that seemed to separate them. Across the city, Alexander remained the man who fascinated and intimidated at once. His rise to power was marked by invisible scars. While the public saw only the unbeatable strategist, those close enough could sense shadows in his restrained gestures, as though every victory carried the weight of loss. To the press and his board, he was the relentless leader, but whispers spoke of his turbulent past, of his father's shameful bankruptcy, and the scandals that nearly destroyed the Whitmore name. In the contrast between the newcomer fighting for a place and the already established magnate, the stage for an inevitable collision was set. Chicago, with its cutting winds and neon lights reflecting off Lake Michigan, would be the silent witness of this story. And within the walls of Whitmore Global, where numbers dictated destinies and every decision echoed in millions, Elena and Alexander were about to discover that behind calculated appearances, far greater forces were at play. Rain streaked in heavy streams across the towering windows of the 42nd floor, setting a scene of almost cinematic tension. The Chicago sky hung heavy, each distant rumble of thunder reverberating inside Alexander Whitmore's office, as though the city itself was part of the looming confrontation. Elena entered, her heels clicking softly against the dark wooden floor, her breath betraying her nervousness. The memory of the ultrasound falling in the lobby still pulsed in her mind, and now, standing before the closed door of the most feared office in the company, her heartbeat raced uncontrollably. Alexander stood with his back to her, gazing at the foggy horizon through the glass wall. His hands rested firmly in the pockets of his charcoal gray suit, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed that this was no ordinary meeting. When he spoke, his voice was restrained, deep, carrying a calculated coldness that cut through the space between them. He asked about the image she had been holding moments before, direct, blunt, as if slicing past the surface straight to the core. There was no room for evasion. The black and white photograph spoke for itself. Elena drew in a breath and tried to answer, but her voice faltered. The difference in hierarchy between them now loomed like an insurmountable wall. She was a junior analyst, recently hired, her reputation still fragile. He was the man who dominated headlines, feared by boards of directors and revered by investors across 3 continents. The risk of being seen as opportunistic, of having her integrity questioned, weighed more than she could bear. Her first reaction was silence. When Alexander finally turned, his gaze was difficult to read. It was not just surprise. There was hardness, yes, but also a subtle fissure, almost imperceptible, that resembled vulnerability. He held the ultrasound in his hand, and the mere presence of that fragile paper seemed to amplify the gravity of the situation. He asked if what he saw belonged to him. Elena hesitated. Words stuck in her throat, caught between the need to protect herself and the life she carried, and the fear of losing everything she had fought so hard to achieve. The rain intensified, drumming against the glass. Outside, Chicago rushed on, but inside that office time stood still. The ticking of a clock on the desk marked each second like a cruel reminder of urgency. Elena finally managed to speak, though her words trembled, cautious. She explained she had planned nothing, that she sought no advantage, that what had happened between them months earlier was nothing more than an unplanned, fleeting instant. She did not deny the obvious, but neither did she fully surrender. Alexander moved slowly to his desk, set the ultrasound down with almost reverent care, and leaned against the polished wood. His eyes carried a storm that matched the scene outside. His silence was so dense it threatened to crush her. When he finally spoke, his voice did not rise, but the weight in his words cut like a blade. He said he needed clarity, that he was not a man to tolerate half-truths, that he had lost too much in life to allow more shadows around him. Elena's heart pounded erratically. Every second in that office deepened the abyss of power between them. And yet, there was an unexpected note of sincerity in the way Alexander looked at her, as if he sought more than answers. Perhaps meaning, perhaps redemption. She realized that in this confrontation, it was not only her career at stake, but the future of the child she carried, or children, though she did not yet know. As the rain subsided, only the muffled sound of the city remained. The confrontation ended not with shouts, nor with accusations, but with suspended tension, with a silent pact that this truth could no longer be ignored. The office, accustomed to decisions worth millions, had become the stage for a far more intimate and devastating revelation. And for both of them, that conversation was not merely an incident. It was the beginning of a path with no return. Months before that office confrontation, the memory of a glittering night still lingered over Elena and Alexander, kept like a secret under lock and key. The Whitmore Gala, held annually in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, brought together the business elite, philanthropists, politicians, and artists, all beneath crystal chandeliers and the echo of orchestral music between marble columns. That night, Elena had been invited by Clara, her friend and confidant, who worked on the event's organization and insisted she take the chance to expand her contacts. Elena did not feel she belonged in that world of luxurious gowns and champagne flutes glowing under golden light, but she accepted more out of curiosity than expectation. It was there, amid conversations about million-dollar mergers and rehearsed charity speeches, that her gaze met Alexander Whitmore's. He walked through the ballroom, carrying both the weight and brilliance of his name. People stepped aside as he passed, as though the air itself shifted around him. Elena, leaning discreetly against one of the columns, observed the movement until suddenly she realized his eyes had locked on hers. The world seemed to slow. There were no journalists, no advisors, no employees around, only a fleeting moment where two people recognized each other amid the excess. He approached with steady steps, and when he asked her to dance, Elena felt a mix of surprise and disbelief. It was not common in her life to be noticed by someone like Alexander. Yet, almost instinctively, her hand accepted his. At the center of the ballroom, to the gentle sound of strings, the two moved as if the world had disappeared. Elena, in a simple dark blue dress, seemed out of place among the women adorned with dazzling jewels and high-fashion gowns, but Alexander did not seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on her, attentive, curious, as though searching for something money and power had never given him. During that dance, words were hardly necessary. There were questions in their eyes, an eloquent silence that needed no explanation. Elena felt a weightlessness, as if for a few minutes she had forgotten who he was and who she was, as if time itself had surrendered to that improbable encounter. He, accustomed to strategic conversations and social masks, revealed himself differently here, almost vulnerable. The music ended, but the moment remained suspended, etched in a place memory could never erase. That night changed both of their lives forever. When they parted, there were no promises, no exchange of numbers, only a restrained smile, as if both understood the night had been nothing but a fleeting adventure. Elena left with the sense of having lived something rare, intense and ephemeral, carrying in her heart a fragment of something she would never dare confess to anyone but Clara. For Alexander, the memory of that night was buried beneath obligations, international flights, and endless meetings, yet it never disappeared completely. That contrast between past and present made the current tension even more painful. Where there had once been lightness, now in the office, there was only weight. The sparkle of the night they first met clashed with the cold steel of Whitmore Global's walls. The same gaze that had once sought Elena among hundreds of guests now confronted her, demanding truths, imposing responsibilities. What had once been a sweet memory now turned into a shadow lingering between them, reminding them that what they felt could not be reduced to chance. That night had planted an invisible seed, a bond that had endured through months of silence and now revealed itself inescapably. In Elena's heart, the memory of the dance remained as a silent refuge, a reminder that gave her strength to face the present. In Alexander's heart, that instant returned as an uncomfortable recollection, proof that even surrounded by power, he was still capable of being touched. That same night, after the confrontation in the office had left a silence heavy with unanswered questions, Alexander made an unexpected decision. Instead of closing the matter with curt orders or scheduling a formal meeting, he invited Elena to accompany him somewhere far outside corporate routine. The invitation was firm, yet not arrogant, almost like a gesture from someone willing to open a door he rarely left ajar. Elena hesitated. Her heart, still racing from the tension of their encounter, pounded in her chest, but something in his voice compelled her to accept. The car glided through Chicago's wet streets, city lights reflecting on the pavement still soaked from the storm. Robert, the driver, steered in silence as always, but Elena felt the weight of the moment in the air. She did not ask where they were going, only watched the city's nightscape passing through the window. When they finally stopped before an old house, surrounded by a discreet garden and softly lit, she was surprised. It was not a mansion, nor a trendy restaurant, but a warm place that clashed completely with Alexander Whitmore's public image. The modest sign read, "Margaret's." Upon entering, Elena was enveloped by the scent of fresh bread and herbs. The brick walls displayed black and white photographs, dark wooden furniture, and simple linen tablecloths. There was no noise of clinking cutlery or chatter, only soft music filling the space. Margaret, a gray-haired woman with a serene smile, welcomed them with the intimacy of someone who needed no introductions. The way she embraced Alexander, like a grandson returned home, revealed the deep connection between this place and his personal history. Elena watched in silence, trying to understand what it meant to be there. It was not just a dinner, but a rare opening. With every detail she noticed, A family photograph, an old clock still marking time with steady ticks. She realized Alexander had not brought her to just any restaurant. This house, now a private space, carried the memory of his grandmother, the woman who had sustained him during hard years when the Whitmore name bore more shame than glory. They sat at a table near the window where the amber glow of the lamps created an intimate atmosphere. Alexander, usually reserved, seemed more human here. His gestures, normally precise and cold, were more relaxed, as if this place allowed him to shed the armor he wore in the world of business. Margaret brought simple dishes, rich with flavor, served with the care of someone who still believed cooking was an act of love. Eleanor, who had begun the meal tense, slowly felt the environment coaxing her to release the breath she had been holding since the office. Their conversation flowed in fragments. Alexander spoke little, but each word sounded sincere, stripped of the rehearsed speeches that usually followed him in the headlines. He asked about Elena's family, about her journey to Whitmore Global, listening with an attentiveness rare for someone in his position. She answered cautiously, conscious of every detail she shared, yet touched by the contrast between the man before her and the magnate in the papers. With each passing minute, the atmosphere shifted. The dinner did not erase the gravity of what had been revealed hours earlier, but it created new ground, where rigidity gave way to vulnerability. Elena realized that beneath the polish of power and control was a man who also carried memories, grief, and affections that no headline could capture. Margaret, with her quiet maternal presence, reinforced this perception. Standing as guardian of a memory Alexander now seemed willing to share. When dinner ended, Elena did not have all the answers, but she left with the certainty that this invitation had not been born of curiosity or obligation alone. Alexander had taken her to a place where he kept not only memories, but fragments of his very identity. And in that space, warmed by the scent of bread and the distant hum of soft music, something beyond initial tension began to take root. A fragile, silent agreement, heavy with possibility. The night carried on at Margaret's, the air suspended between past and present. The golden light cast Alexander's features in a way unlike the sterile glow of boardrooms or the cold ink of headlines. Here before Eleanor, he was not the king of mergers, but a man compelled for some reason to open drawers he had kept locked for years. After long minutes of silence, holding a glass of wine he had barely touched, Alexander drew in a deep breath and began to speak, without preamble, as if tearing off an old bandage. He told her about Isabella, his first love, his high school sweetheart, with whom he had dreamed of building a life. The memory was vivid in every detail. Her smile on summer mornings, the plans scribbled in notebooks, the promises whispered under starry skies. It was a story of youth, but it carried the intensity of something never resolved. Alexander spoke with a restrained voice, but his eyes betrayed the pain. Isabella had become pregnant when they were still very young. He believed it would be the start of a new chapter, but tragedy stole the future. Complications during childbirth claimed both the baby and Isabella, and Alexander, still barely more than a boy, had been forced to witness it, powerless. Elena stayed silent, absorbing every word. She had never imagined that behind the flawless image in the papers were wounds so deep. Alexander continued, explaining that this loss had shaped his life. The bright headlines, the relentless drive for results, the image of the unbreakable man, all of it came from an unfillable void. He admitted that, ever since, he had lived with the conviction that fate would always find a way to take from him whatever he loved most. His words were not spoken like an easy confession. They seemed wrenched out, each sentence demanding he cross barriers of pain and pride. Eleanor, her eyes glistening, felt the revelation was more than a retelling of the past. It was an act of trust. In that moment, Alexander shed the mask and showed her he was not only the untouchable magnate, but a man marked by vulnerability. The silence that followed was heavy, and yet necessary. Margaret, who moved discreetly among the tables, seemed to understand without needing to hear. She placed a basket of warm bread on the table, as if it were her way of offering comfort. Alexander rested his hand on the table for a moment, without looking directly at Elena, as though waiting for judgment or rejection. But instead of pulling away, she remained present, her gaze steady and compassionate. The memory of Isabella lingered in the air like a ghost, but it also revealed something essential about Alexander. His obsession with control, his difficulty in surrendering, his cold armor. These were not merely traits of character, they were defense mechanisms forged against an old wound. Elena, realizing this, felt pierced by a mix of empathy and fear. Empathy, because she understood that the man before her was not solely the product of ambition, but of an open wound. Fear, because now she knew her own situation, her unexpected pregnancy, touched the most delicate point of his story. The next minutes unfolded in dense silence, until Alexander lifted his eyes and for the first time that night spoke with raw sincerity, without reserve. He admitted that perhaps he had never overcome the loss, that he had lived all those years hiding behind power, but now he could not ignore what stood before him. He confessed that when he held the ultrasound in the lobby, he hadn't just seen an image, he had seen the echo of something torn from his life years ago. Elena drew a deep breath, sensing that moment marked a turning point. There were no promises, no solutions, only the bare exposure of pain. And yet, that shared truth created an unexpected bond. The dinner at Margaret's, which had begun as an improbable invitation, had become the stage for revelations neither of them could forget. And there, amid the smell of bread in the oven and the old photographs on the walls, Elena realized she was facing not only a powerful magnate, but a man who had learned to live with ghosts, and who now invited her wordlessly to know them as well. As the night at Margaret's deepened, the cozy atmosphere that had first revealed Alexander's vulnerability began giving way to heavier shadows. Elena, still moved by the unexpected confession about Isabella, sensed there were more layers hidden in the man before her. Alexander, noticing her attentive gaze, sighed and laid an old newspaper clipping on the table, yellowed with age, carefully kept in his folder. The printed words were harsh, almost cruel: bankruptcy, scandal, ruin. The name Whitmore blazed in the headline with a crushing weight. It was the story of his father's company collapse, an episode that had not only shaken the family's fortune, but publicly exposed their vulnerability. Alexander recounted how he had grown up hearing the whispers at social events, watching doors close, enduring the constant humiliation of carrying a surname tied to failure. The empire he now ruled with an iron grip had been born out of the need to rebuild not only businesses, but the honor of a name. Elena listened in silence, touched by his candor, and at the same time aware of what it meant to be in front of a man haunted by such powerful ghosts. For him, every decision, every merger, every corporate victory was more than numbers. It was a relentless battle against the memory of his father's downfall. Alexander stared at the clipping for a few seconds before tucking it away again, as if even the act of showing it caused him pain. At that moment, his phone vibrated on the table. The name on the screen read, "London." Alexander answered, maintaining his rigid composure, and Elena could catch fragments of the conversation in rapid, tense English. On the other end, investors demanded answers, questioning the company's recent moves, suggesting Whitmore Global's stability was not as solid as the American press claimed. The pressure was clear, and every word seemed to add weight to Alexander's shoulders. As he spoke, Elena observed the subtle changes in his expression: the clenched jaw, the hardening eyes, the increasingly controlled tone of voice, as if he were fighting not to reveal weakness. When he hung up, he sat in silence for a few seconds, staring into the void, before admitting that Chicago's press had already begun speculating again, dredging up old wounds and questioning whether the empire he had built could withstand international crises. Elena felt the tension grow. She knew her very presence, and especially the pregnancy, could become fuel for a media eager for scandal. One rumor, one leaked photograph, and all of Alexander's effort to preserve Whitmore Global's image could collapse. The reputational risk hovered not only over him, but now over her as well. Being linked to the CEO threatened not just her career, but also her personal reputation, built with such effort. Alexander seemed aware of this. He looked at Elena with seriousness and said the corporate world did not forgive vulnerabilities. The power gap between them, already an abyss, could easily become a target. Advisors in Chicago could raise suspicions of favoritism. Journalists in London could accuse him of covering up personal secrets to protect business interests. The ravenous media would make a feast of their story. The weight of truth wrapped them in silence. Elena clasped her hands on her lap, her heart tightening. This was not just about two adults grappling with personal choices, but about a legacy, an inheritance of failures and triumphs, and a future that now included the life she carried. Margaret, passing by to clear the dishes, cast them a brief, almost maternal look, as if she too understood the invisible gravity in the air. Outside, the city glowed on, indifferent to the drama unfolding in that small restaurant tucked away in the streets of Chicago. But for Alexander and Elena, the reality was different. They were surrounded by external pressures threatening to crush any attempt at building something real. Between the memory of his father's bankruptcy, the press speculation, and the unrelenting demands of foreign investors, the space for personal choices grew narrower by the second. And yet, in that moment, heavy with tension, one certainty stood out. Ignoring what lay between them was no longer possible. The following morning carried a different weight, as though the night at Margaret's had opened doors that could never again be closed. Eleanor woke with the sensation that the world was collapsing beneath her feet, though the baby, silent and hidden, was the only solid certainty she possessed. On her way to the office, Chicago's cold wind seemed to blow harder, and the hurried faces on the street mirrored the same urgency that now filled her mind. With each step, doubt grew. How could she reconcile her personal life with the storm of interests surrounding Alexander and Whitmore Global? In the imposing building, the corridors buzzed louder than usual. Whispers spread among analysts and assistants, and Elena noticed curious glances turned toward her, even when masked by professional expressions. It was as if everyone sensed something was happening beyond the routine of reports and meetings. When she reached her desk, she found Clara, her friend and confidant, waiting with a newspaper in hand. The headline, bold and stark, speculated about the Whitmore legacy, accompanied by an old photograph of Alexander's father, walking with his head bowed during the bankruptcy proceedings. Clara, speaking in a low, worried tone, remarked that this was only the beginning. Rumors were already spreading that foreign investors in London were dissatisfied with the company's recent moves, and the local press would not miss the chance to tie Alexander to his family's turbulent past. Elena felt her stomach twist. This was not merely his problem, it was a shadow stretching over her as well. If anyone discovered their connection, the ultrasound would no longer be just a photograph kept in secret, but a public scandal. At that moment, Elena's phone vibrated with an unexpected message. It was from Rutherford & Co., the firm where she had worked before accepting the position at Whitmore Global. The HR director expressed interest in rehiring her, this time for a higher role, in recognition of the work she had left behind. The offer came with tempting conditions, but for Elena, it carried another meaning: a possible honorable exit from the dilemma she now faced. If she accepted, she could protect her reputation while keeping her distance from the storm threatening to consume her. While she pondered the offer, Alexander convened a board meeting. The voices around the long table were filled with concern and criticism. Some demanded transparency about the rumors from London, others urged caution in the face of growing media exposure. None of them, however, had any idea of the personal turmoil Alexander was battling in parallel. He listened to every word with an impassive expression, but inwardly he wrestled with the memory of the night before and the awareness that his life was about to become inextricably entwined with Elena's. After the meeting, Alexander crossed the corridors until he found her. There were no theatrical gestures, only the seriousness of a man who knew reality had to be faced. He told her he was aware of the offer from Rutherford & Co. The information had reached him through market contacts, and he admitted he saw it as a chance to protect them both. He explained that if Elena accepted, They could avoid accusations of favoritism, silence suspicions, and at the same time allow her to continue her career without carrying the weight of the Whitmore name. Elena listened with her heart heavy. His words made sense, but they carried emotional implications that went far beyond logic. Part of her wanted to stay by his side, to face the storm together. Another part knew that by remaining at Whitmore Global, she would become an easy target for the media and even the board itself. The offer from Rutherford appeared as an ethical choice, but also as a painful separation. Outside, the city carried on indifferently, winds rushing between skyscrapers, Lake Michigan reflecting the gray winter light. Inside that corporate world, however, Elena and Alexander were surrounded by forces that stretched beyond their feelings. The media, the investors, the weight of family legacy, and the burden of ethical decisions all piled up like walls around them. Reputational risk was no longer just a distant threat. It had become the most concrete obstacle between them and any chance of a future. The days that followed were marked by a silent tension, as if every gesture and every word carried a weight heavier than it should. Elena had accepted Rutherford & Co.'s offer, and though it had been a rational choice, made to preserve her career and avoid being pulled into the whirlpool of Whitmore Global, the emptiness of her absence in the company's halls echoed inside Alexander. He saw her less, spoke to her less, but felt her more. It was as if distance had the power to magnify her importance in his life rather than diminish it. Meanwhile, the ultrasound remained hidden in Elena's desk drawer, a silent yet pulsing secret. On nights when loneliness became unbearable, she would take it out of the envelope and trace the image with her fingers, searching for strength in what was yet to come. She thought about what the baby would be like, how the world would react when the truth emerged, and above all, about Alexander's face when he saw the baby for the first time. The dilemma was not just professional or social, it was intimate, visceral, and no calculation of risk could lessen the intensity of the weight. At Whitmore Global, the rumors didn't stop. London demanded immediate results, while the Chicago press exploited every detail of Alexander's family legacy, as if it were an unfolding spectacle. Headlines revived past scandals and cast doubts over the future. Some days it felt impossible to separate the man from the executive, and through it all, Alexander wore the shadow of the Whitmore name like a fractured armor, resilient, but vulnerable. It was amid this storm that an unexpected letter arrived for Elena. The envelope, with no clear sender, bore only her name written in firm strokes. Inside was an anonymous message. Secrets don't stay hidden forever. Chicago doesn't forgive. There was no signature, no explanation, only the sharp certainty that someone was watching. Someone knew. Someone was ready to use her truth as a weapon. Her heart raced, and a fierce maternal instinct awakened within her, putting her on high alert. Elena chose not to tell Alexander immediately. She feared burdening him further while he was already struggling with the board and the investors. She tucked the letter away beside the ultrasound, as though gathering pieces of a puzzle still without solution. But unease haunted her. Clara, ever perceptive, noticed the weight in her friend's eyes and encouraged her to reflect on what she truly wanted. More than preserving her reputation or career, Elena needed to decide if she had the courage to stand by Alexander's side, even in the middle of every storm. On the other side, Alexander felt her absence like deafening silence. At night, when Chicago's skyscrapers glowed against the gray sky, he wondered what it would be like if Elena were there, sharing that hidden space of vulnerability with him. He remembered the night at Margaret's, the way fate had put them face to face, and asked himself if he had the strength not to let that meeting slip away into the city's cold winds. Tension reached its peak during a decisive board meeting, when Alexander was pressed to take a stance on the company's image crisis. The pressure was so great that, for the first time in years, he allowed a glimpse of weakness. He left the room before it ended, walked through Chicago's frozen streets, and, almost unconsciously, his steps led him to the building where Elena now worked. There was no invitation, no warning, only the urgency of being before her. When their eyes met, there were no speeches, no justifications. There was only the raw truth of two worlds colliding, the inevitability of a bond that neither time nor distance nor anonymous threats could dissolve. In that moment, standing against the city's cutting cold and the silent warmth of their reunion, Elena understood. They were bound forever. Night fell over Chicago, lights reflected on the wet asphalt, and everything seemed to announce that their destiny was about to be defined. 18 months had passed since those days of tension and buried secrets, and Chicago awoke to a bright morning that seemed to promise renewal and lightness. In the garden of the home that Elena and Alexander now shared, trees swayed gently in the breeze, scattering sunlight across the neat lawn. The place, a harmonious blend of elegance and comfort, breathed the story of a family born from challenges, fears, and difficult choices. The vivid colors of the flowers contrasted with the deep blue of the sky, and every detail seemed to tell the journey the two had walked together to reach that moment. Lucas and Sophia, the twins who had transformed their lives, ran across the grass with laughter that rang out like music. Alexander, in a rolled-up dress shirt and light linen trousers, chased them with playful banter that drew bursts of giggles from the children. Elena, in a casual dress that moved freely with her steps, watched with teary eyes, feeling pride and relief all at once. Every movement of the children reflected the union hard-won through struggle, the balance between responsibility and affection, between ambition and family life. In the corner of the garden, set on a small wooden easel, stood the framed ultrasound that once brought shock and silence. The inscription beneath it read, "The day our family began." To outsiders, it was just an old photograph. To Elena and Alexander, it was the symbol of a promise fulfilled, the beginning of a shared life, the silent commitment that had become reality. The image reminded them that every challenge faced, every secret kept, every difficult decision had been worth it. Margaret moved discreetly around the veranda, watching her grandchildren play, bringing fresh juice and cakes prepared with the care of someone who understands that while routine may be demanding, family life deserves tenderness. She smiled with the serenity that only those who have witnessed generations can possess, knowing that the house, once a refuge from Alexander's past, was now the stage of happy memories, where laughter outweighed the shadows of old losses. As the twins ran and played, Alexander stepped closer to Elena. There was no need for many words. The touch of their hands, the firm and silent embrace, conveyed what words could never express. There in the sunlit garden, there were no longer fears of corporate judgment or media rumors. Every scar from the past, every loss, every fear dissolved in the certainty that what they had built together was real, solid, and unshakable. Elena, feeling the warmth of his embrace and his watchful gaze upon their children, realized how much they had grown, not only the children, but themselves as well. The doubts, the fears, the tension that had marked the beginning of her pregnancy and the period of professional adaptation had turned into lessons, into strength, into shared intimacy. The road had not been easy, but now it revealed itself full of meaning. The twins, unaware of the depth of the moment, ran between them, alternating between bursts of laughter and small tumbles, which Alexander and Elena helped them up from with care and patience. Each simple gesture, a hand extended, a kiss on the forehead, a sprint across the lawn, became a symbol of a routine built on love and balance. What once had been a challenge had become complicity, and what once was fear was now mutual trust. As the sun continued to shine over the garden, Elena and Alexander exchanged a silent glance, heavy with memories, with trials overcome, and with plans for the future. Neither of them needed to say aloud what that moment meant. The family they had dreamed of, having endured grief, rumors, external pressures, and personal challenges, was there, alive and vibrant. The framed ultrasound, the laughter of Lucas and Sophia, Margaret's silent and caring presence, and the steady touch of Alexander's hands over hers, all of it gathered into a single, unique instant, the fulfilled promise of love, partnership, and a shared life. And that day in Chicago, Under the clear sky and upon the lawn that had witnessed so many steps of courage, Elena and Alexander understood, with full hearts, that they had finally reached the balance they had always imagined. Together, with their children, building a story that had begun with a simple ultrasound in the lobby of Whitmore Global and had grown into the richness of a family that had overcome fear, loss, and even time itself. And so concludes another heartwarming story here on Enchanting Stories. If you were moved by Elena, Alexander, and the twins, don't forget to like this video. Every like helps share these incredible stories. Click the subscribe button and join our growing community, filled with people who love to be inspired and emotionally touched. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an exciting chapter that we prepare with so much care. We want to hear from you. Which city are you watching us from today? Share it in the comments. And don't forget to share this video with friends who also love stories of resilience and true love. Here at Enchanting Stories, every story is a hug for the heart. Come be part of this family.